Hello everybody, today I'm going to talk about writing summaries. The reason I'm doing this is because lots of students have problems with writing summaries. It's not easy. Also, students who have missed my class get the chance to see how to do it again. Writing summaries. Now, you can think of writing a summary of a piece of work like the way you'd summarise a film if you'd gone to see a film with a friend. You see a film that's 3 hours long and you summarise it in a few sentences. It was a really interesting film. It was set in Africa and she lived there all her life, and he came to work as a farmer in the next door farm and they fell in love, and it was really quite sweet and silly. Right, that's a summary, okay? Now if we write summaries of academic work, we read something and it might be a half page, it might be a whole page, it might be 10,000 words, 50,000 words, but we as academics have got to be able to read something and understand what it means and be able to summarise that in a nutshell in our own words. So when we're reading something, we are always thinking to ourselves, why did he write this? We're asking, why did the person write it? What is he telling me? Sorry, that's rather sexist because it should be he or she. What you should be doing when you read anything is asking why. Is this part of the text an illustration? Is it an example? Is it something to help me understand what's being said? You're asking questions all the time. I'm going to start explaining the summary now using the one we used for the exam a couple of weeks ago, and it is still called Signs of Life. Article from the Economist, a page long, but actually the person is trying to tell us a few things, and it's up to us to be critical readers and understand what he's really trying to tell us. So we start reading. Here it is. I hope it's visible. Signs of Life. And we start reading it, and there's a big question mark because we first ask, what signs of life? What's showing signs of life? What's this about? Okay, and we read down further and we realise that, oh, it's talking about globalisation. I'm sorry about this. I shan't do this anymore. It's talking about globalisation. So we keep reading and we keep reading. Is this interesting? Is this detailed? Remember, a piece of text like this will of course include lots of detail. The person who wrote this, Mr. Stanley, could have actually told us what he wanted to tell us in about 70 words or less. But because it's an article, he has to show that he's got evidence, that he's read everything. We don't need to add that into our summary, simply because the person who reads our summary can look at the reference and go and read the original text. Okay? So, we're reading through and we're asking ourselves questions. Is this an example? Is this interesting information but not necessary to the main message? And you perhaps can't see on this paper, I've put lots of scribbles and questions and ideas. This is all about trade, for example. This is all about trade. Very interesting, but it's not the main message. Okay? I'll carry on. I read this, and while I'm reading it and asking questions, I start making notes. Now again, I've got a piece of paper. I'm going to add these all as copies on the site so you can look at them. These are my notes, how I did it. I start making notes, and it doesn't matter if you can't read them. They're sort of scribbles on a page. That's my first attempt at finding out or trying to work out what's going on. I write some scribbles down on a page and I revisit the text and I try and work out what is it about. Now this is unreadable, but for you it's something like what's showing signs of life and why, because it was dead, and what was dead. Oh, it's globalisation. trade, and I've got all sorts of notes, and they're not very interesting or useful yet. Okay? Then I start playing around with them. What's it about? It's about globalization. It's about globalization after the crash. So then my notes get a bit more focused. It's something about globalization, and it's affected us, and countries are getting protective, and globalization is perhaps stopping, and I'm working it out and working it out. Then I end up with a quick summary at the bottom. This quick summary, after going through this text a few times, asking questions, I end up with a quick summary like this. It's something that I can say to myself without looking at the paper. Globalization has decreased since the crash, and the reasons are because of protectionism and the connectivity between countries changed or lessened, and since we are recovering, some things are getting back to normal and improving. Other things like trade are still having problems because trade between countries still isn't getting back to normal because people are becoming more cautious and more protectionist. And even though we're optimistic now, the writer says we must be careful because it could happen again. We're not out of the problem anyway. Did I miss anything? Well, I think that's sort of the main idea. So let's try and write it. Oh, before I do that, there was a picture. It's a small world after all. Another thing I ask why. Why is it a small world? What's that about? Small world is caused by globalization. And it's a small world after all. Because, according to the writer, globalization is still around. So this is my first sort of real draft. I'm starting to write it so it looks like a summary. Looks like a summary, it's not there yet. You can't read it at all. Sorry, I'm sorry. I will make copies of all these. Again, it's a mess. I look at it and I rewrite it. The next one. Less of a mess. Almost there. I counted these words, it's 70 words. It doesn't really matter. What I've done is, I've read it, I've asked why all the time. Why is he telling me this? Why is he telling me this? And a lot of the time he's telling me these things to support his main argument. Of course we have to do that. As academics, we have to support our main arguments with facts, with other research, but he wants to tell us what he thinks, and that is that globalization is probably showing signs of life, is probably recovering, but we can't be sure. So this piece of paper, which is the original, I've just sort of marked out in yellow the things that I actually picked out. The things with the lines through them are the detail. People can find the detail out. If your summary interests them, they'll go and look at this article. You don't need to explain the different types of connectivity. You do not need to explain the 4 types of flow across borders. These are all things which are illustrative for this particular article. You had to tell me what Stanley was telling us. And basically, he's telling us the title, Globalization Showing Signs of Life, and the final sentence. We mustn't be too optimistic because it can always go wrong again. Then a few bits in the middle to tie it up. That's it. Summarizing is about reading more than about writing. The reading and the making notes and working it out, the thinking, that's the most important thing. Finally getting it onto a piece of paper, which took me, how many attempts? Pages and pages of writing and thinking. 3. to end up with this. The actual really trying to write it well, the writing bit took that draft and then making it into that draft. Summarising is about asking why, and it's about putting in your words the essence of what you've read. I hope this has helped you. I'll put copies of all these scribblings and everything on the portal, or on the blog maybe, and I'll come back and do another summary of another one. Remember, summary writing is more about being able to read and understand than actually about being able to write. As long as you can write and communicate what you've read, then you're there. And then if you add academic style to it, then you get more points, of course. But to be able to write what you've read in a short version is the essence. Hope this has helped. Of course, you can come to me with questions, and I'll be back again shortly with a new video on paraphrasing and a few more on summarising. Thank you. Goodbye.